Okay, excellent.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 12th webinar, The Divine Feminine. Duane is here, as usual. I just want to say hi to everybody and thank you for coming. And Veronica, Antoinette, Catherine, Connie, Dana, Deborah, Diana, James, Joe, Josephine, Lenny, Marjute, Michael, Risa, Sholene, Tia, and Vera. And I'm sorry if I butchered some of your names. Okay, over to you, Duane.
Thank you, BL. And I'd like to extend my appreciation to the Moya University for sponsoring these series of talks with special attention to UBL and Rose for your technical assistance, of which without I would be lost.
Well, we're happy to help because you do such great webinars. Your subject matter is always very exciting.
Well, thank you. Okay, I've listed here a few of the goals that we'd like to achieve somewhat during this presentation, which you all know is about the divine feminine. But as we will see, you can't really isolate the divine feminine from the divine masculine effectively because they are a composite unity and whole. But we will do that somewhat in the early stages of this presentation and then sort of bring it around full circle so that we can step back and see a larger whole. One of the goals of these series of webinars is to sensitize ourselves towards these Aquarian emerging truths, what DK outlined as the superhuman physics or the new sciences of energy and force. And interestingly, they can be emerging in very simple ways that might not be obvious upon first glance. I have found this is quite true with the media. There are many movies and documentaries and shows of different types that really bring out some deep truths in a very linear, sort of horizontal, mainstream way. And that is, of course, what we're going to do with our opening video, which is on the trilogy, The Hobbit. And it is sort of a condensation of certain images extracted from these three different parts of the trilogy that relate to a very large degree around the divine feminine. But that'll be self-explanatory, and we will explore that after we view it. I'm often asked, particularly in the Facebook site that I've started, if this is about awakening the higher mind and the intuition, why is there so much mental activity, so many mental outlines? And it's a good question, and one I'd like to sort of outline. First of all, there are two types of simplicity. There's the simplicity of the masters that have gone through the human condition and perfected, reached very, very high levels, and they are participating in a type of simplicity that may be hard for the average aspirant, probationer, and even disciple to understand. It should never be confused with the simplicity of the sort of New Ager. My life is complicated and there's too much going on. I just want to simplify it. And no one can argue the value of that. But that is sort of at the opposite end of the spectrum of this higher type of simplicity, which one wins the right to enter only after they have sort of sorted through, organized, and used the mental body, the lower one, the lower mind, adequately and in the right way as a building tool. You can get caught in the lower mind, and that's been one of my main themes. The lower mind slays the real, but in all honesty, it's the undisciplined and the uncoordinated mind that slays the real, because actually the mind is one of the greatest tools you have to go beyond itself and into these more abstract levels. Somewhat of a paradox, but nevertheless true. Now, a lot of what we're going to share here today relates to some of the teachings in the discipleship in the New Age books. And it's beyond our scope to go into it too extensively, but let me just say this as an opening statement. Those two books are profound in several ways, one of which is the master, DK, attempting to bring balance into his students' lives through a series of meditations that are given and wisdom that he shares. And it is not uncommon for a disciple to be more along one line of approach to deity than another line of approach. And if DK could see that you've developed the masculine qualities that fall quite naturally on the 1-3-5-7, he would give visualizations and information for that disciple to swing their attention more over to the feminine. In contradistinction, if the Tibetan saw that the student was way too orientated in a more 2-4-6 way, more of what we call feminine, the love, the harmony, and the emotional rays, he would give them visualizations and meditations to swing them into the other stream, the more masculine stream. And it's just a masterful job of psychology, science, and art all rolled into one. And any of you who have studied those books can see the immense practicality of how do you balance this male and female, these dual lines of approach. Okay, now, having made those sort of opening statements, I would like to have a show of hands of anyone who has gone to my Facebook site and has seen this video that we're going to share right now. It's called The Lord of the Rings, May It Be, there's the music by Enya, and it's little vignettes from that trilogy. How many have actually seen this at the Facebook website? Now, it's not critical that you've done it. It's self-explanatory, and we're going to really get into it. Okay, I saw one hand, which is fine. I see 3.
Yeah, there's more coming up now.
4. Do we have 5? Do I see a 5? Okay, 3. Somebody realized it was a different movie. They took their vote back. Okay, excellent. So, with no more introductory statements, let's watch the video and feel free to take notes. It's only about 3 minutes long, but it's loaded with very, very powerful symbols. If any of you who have seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy, it is full of lots of violence and death and destruction. But this particular compendium of vignettes rises above all the rest in that it, in my opinion, it picked out just certain key things that show the divine feminine emerging in new and creative ways. Okay.
May it be an evening star shines down upon you. May it be when darkness falls, your heart will be true. You walk a lonely road. Oh, how far you are from home. Morning air, utually believe and you will find your way. Morning air, aloud a promise lives within you. May it be the shadows call will fly away. May it be you journey on to light the day. When the night is overcome, you may rise to find the sun. And you will find your way. Morning air, aloud a promise lives within you. A promise lives within you.
Okay, excellent. Are there anyone that would like to make any comments on this video? BL, am I still on?
Yeah, you are. And no,
Okay.
I don't see any hands or comments at this point.
Okay. Well, as people raise their hands, we'll put them on. Until then, I'm just going to briefly skip through a few of the obvious symbols in this movie. Those who have studied the works of H.P. Blavatsky and Alice Bailey know the symbology of the circle. the ring. And it really relates towards the first ray of power, the will, what DK calls the principle of directed purpose. And this trilogy, or at least main parts of it, revolve around the ability to capture this magical ring, to put it on, and to have these unlimited powers. But of course, humanity, with its frailty, it doesn't work quite that simply. And people become megalomaniacs, and they do all kinds of horrible things. And the hobbits, if I remember the storyline correctly, they're there to attempt to retrieve it and to return it to the proper placement, which is in the hands of the forces of light as opposed to the forces of darkness. So to me, that's one of the obvious symbols. Now, are there any comments up to this point?
Yes.
Okay.
Diana says the ring is in the middle finger, which is the heart finger.
Excellent. The power seated in the heart. Beautiful. Anyone else?
That's all I see right now.
Okay. We see the heroine who's being chased by the dark forces riding on a white horse. And can anyone think of the significance of a rider on a white horse?
Let me see. Antoinette says, water poured forth for thirsty men.
Excellent. Yes, and one of the images, the princess or the goddess, I don't know exactly her position, but it's obvious she's a representative of the forces of light, and she has this sort of an urn vase that she turns, and out pours the waters of life. Beautiful. Any additional comments?
I see that the feminine is, she's embodying the first ray and the second ray, and she's like in this image you have here where her hand is raised. It's sort of like a Christ type pose where you're giving like a blessing with the right hand, which I believe symbolizes also the first ray, but it's like the first ray, the will through the second ray, which is
Yes,
always where the will has to come for it to be beneficial. Whereas if it's not tempered by that second ray, then it becomes destructive and is about more too much of the power versus the power for the love.
excellent. It can be held up in salutations, greetings, benedictions. It can be held up as a rod of power, which we know is far more esoteric than somebody's raised hand. But if the participant who's raising the hand is of initiate consciousness, then they can project from the major centers through the minor centers, and one of them, of course, is in the right hand, which is the Buddhic, just as the right eye is Buddhi. Excellent. Rose, thank you. Anyone else like to?
Yes, we have some other comments. Risa says the Christ, the Prince of Peace coming on a white horse.
Yes. The Bodhisattva, Lord Maitreya. Any of those images of love and complete transformation through the intuition. Excellent. Thank you, Risa.
Antoinette says Capricorn climbing the mountaintop. And then she also adds a double-edged sword.
Yes. That can cut either direction. It can harm or it can heal. And The sword in the hands of the dark forces is detrimental, and the sword in the hands of a light worker are benevolent, uplifting, transforming, and it also is a symbol of a rod of initiation and definitely a first ray accoutrement. Any additional insights?
Yes, we have a number, and then we also have a hand up. Diana says at the beginning, the lady wears a necklace with an angel.
Ah, yes. And in the figure that you can see on the screen right now, she has sort of a tiara, but it looks very Davic. It's like comes together at one point, and then these two lobes sort of spring out. And interesting, it's just above the ajna center, which is always a symbol of the white magician who works with rays 4 and 5, which are Buddhi and higher mind. Excellent. Thank you. Any additional comments?
Yes, Risa says the trilogy showed polarity, duality in sharp focus.
Yes. As odd as it may sound, sometimes we need to know not what we want to become or want to do or progress into. We have to have stark contrast from what it is we want to move away from. And that's where we get the idea of duality. But if you look at the initiations and man and woman's passage through the initiations, you realize the dualities change at each initiation. They don't cease to exist. They just shift up to a higher octave. And even our whole cosmic physical plane is caught in a very subtle way in that polarity. But as DK would say, at that level, it's impossible to go unless you're a 5th degree initiate or beyond. Okay, excellent. Any more comments? These are great.
Yes. Risa adds dual archetypes, duality, death and life, hope and despair.
Yes. Excellent.
And then Michael says the rider on the white horse is referenced in the book of Revelation, with the rider being the higher self.
Yes. And or the avatar of synthesis that is assisting the Christ and the masters to bring about redemption and transformation on a historical level that is unprecedented.
Josephine says the circle ring is repeated in the circle of men, with one speaker in the middle, a feminine model versus the masculine model, where the man speaks from a stage down to a crowd.
Excellent.
And Risa says enlightenment.
Yes.
Okay, we had a hand up and it went down, but it looks like we have a hand up. Go ahead, Rose, can you?
Yes, I just wanted to comment about the white horse that I believe it's somewhere in the Secret Doctrine. Blavatsky says, I believe it's Fohat is on its quick steed, or ride the steed. And it's kind of an interesting symbology, but the horse is like the vehicle carrying the manifested higher self, and white represents the whole thing with purity. So
Excellent. You see that in all major religions, the bull. And the disciple rides atop the bull, which is symbol of the desire nature. This is another level of interpretation. And when he or she can master the lower self or the bull, one is passing through the higher initiations. But again, in symbols, there's always multiple levels, because later, particularly the Taurian bull becomes a symbol of the opened eye of enlightenment and illumination, with, to quote the Tibetan, the upturned horns of duality, which are blinded by that inner eye blazing forth from the forehead between the two physical eyes. Excellent.
And Veronica says, looking at it from the view of symbols, I saw 1, the ring, 2, the archer, 3, the sword, 4, Gandalf's three-pointed staff, 5, the fog, 6, the urn with the pouring water, the saluting of the hand.
Excellent.
The symbol of the feet. 6, the mountains and the view from the top. 7, the running horseman. 8, the symbols from the cloaks of the hobbits and the necklace of the fairy. And 8, running waters, the river. And 9, the passage through to the rocks.
Excellent. Great and detailed powers of observation here.
And she says, and the crown.
In the crown. Excellent. There are universal symbols in this, and there are personal symbols in this. And both are valuable. Both are useful and creative. One of the things that I found particularly interesting was the 3 boats that were being chased by the dark forces, entering into what I see as sort of like the ashram, the 2 men, helmeted figures with their arms outstretched, meaning to me, no one can pass here who is not virtuous and does not have love in their hearts. And here's a case where when you're dealing with Buddhic energy and Atmic energy and higher mental energy, you sail effortlessly over the astral seas that drowned average humanity, and of course, ultimately, are the forces that bring the dark ones down. DK has a peculiar quote, and I'm going to share it now, that sort of summarizes the enigma, the paradox of the dark forces. And he says that they will eventually cease to exist because of an excess of their own basic principle. And I've really thought about that quite a few times, and there's probably multiple meanings there, but I take away from it that the forces of darkness, when they can't beat out the forces of light and they're on the losing end, they're going to turn upon themselves sort of like a junkyard dog. As long as it's pointed towards what they think is some adversary, they're ferocious. But once the adversary disappears, they turn on their master. And then their master, of course, is even those of darker intent than they. Okay, excellent. The swords. And you'll note that all these dark forces with their dark cloaks and their dark vibe were chasing, I don't know if that was easy to see, it was one of the heroines, and she eluded the dark forces. And to go back to some comment someone made, a lot of this I see revolves around the misuse of the mental faculties and the lower masculine energies. Because we know ultimately the first ray is the complete liberator, not just from our causal bodies, but ultimately from the rings past not of the solar system itself, and puts us in touch with these constellations that are only dimly represented, such as the Pleiades, the Great Bear, Sirius, to name the three primary ones. So excellent, excellent symbols. And there was even some human interaction there where one of the heroes and heroines were kissing on a ramp. And to me, it was very beautiful because it demonstrated that all these cosmic principles can and will pass down through the lower vehicles. And when the lower vehicles respond and become what DK calls the lower representation or the lower notes, it's a very beautiful, beautiful expression of divinity. And this can be taken right down into human sexuality, whereas when it comes from the heart and it comes from these very, very high levels down, it can become what is part of a divine marriage and all these other levels. Anyway, good. If there aren't any additional comments.
There's
good.
And Veronica says, could the three boats be the mental, the astral, and the etheric?
Absolutely, absolutely. The Trinity, the triad, those three primary forces are in all myths and really good narrations and storytelling. For those of you who are familiar with the myth man, his name evades me. Anyway, he did brilliant work revealing the potency of myths. And he's world renowned. I just can't quite put my finger on his.
Is that Joseph Campbell?
Yes, Joseph Campbell. And Carl Jung also did some really, really amazing things.
And Veronica also says,
yes.
I forgot the light in all the film, and especially the light in the dark cave.
Yes, that even in the dark cave, there were small lights. Now, this symbol right here is one of my favorite of the divine feminine. She's cocked at a position that indicates receptivity. She has her hands outstretched. You can see the lotus of the heart. You can see the light pouring down into her ajna center. And there are some important relationships technically with the heart, the solar plexus, and the ajna center that we won't go into now, but it's just all the movement, the waves, the fire, to me is very, very powerful. Now, on the next image, we're going to see one that's considerably different. And this is actually one of my original works of art. And you can see the quote from Agni Yoga. Thus, amidst the raging fire, one can see a thin sword above the forehead of the warrior spirit. And you'll notice that sort of the vague figure is sort of feminine, but it's got sort of, it could be androgynous. We're trying to really invoke not just the feminine, but the divine hermaphrodite that exists within each disciple, within each person. And I think this time historically, this idea of women moving into their power is very, very important. And it's obvious that we all need to love more, to be more compassionate, to be more psychically sensitive, to be more healing. That is a given. But at this time, historically, I see as like the whole population on the planet, and it's not just one group or one country, women moving into their power, and yet not violating the integrity of the gains already made along the 246 line. It's sort of difficult to really stereotype gender, because when you're an esotericist, you know that a man can have a physical body that's obviously male, but they can have, what ray is their astral body on, their mental body, their soul body, or, and last, of course, but not least, their monadic body. If a man is born into a body that's obviously male, but they have a lot of female attributes, they have a lot of 246, then yes, they're a male on the physical, but on the other sheaths or bodies, they can be something considerably different. So it just sort of comes around, and you can say the same thing between men and women. And I see women moving into what I would call, for lack of better words, the halls of power. And here in the United States, and this is also happening around the world, particularly Europe, women are moving into very influential positions. Now, they already have been doing this, but it exponentially in a new way. And you'll see that in the United States with a lot of these newbies that have just come into the House of Representatives, and bringing, even if they lack a political experience, they bring something far more important, because you can learn the job, many jobs there as you do it. Learn by doing, as DK would say. They are representing a whole constituency of people that, in my opinion, have not been represented. And they bring humor, they bring compassion, they bring love, but they also bring power. And this is not only something they bring, something they're being initiated into. And it's so beautiful and so refreshing, because anyone who looks superficially at world conditions can see that the fifth ray is a great revelatory solar angel that's really come from a very high place, heart of the sun, Venus, or whatever. But its lower expression right now, historically, is causing a lot of inhibition, a lot of blockages. And this new feminine wave of heart energy that can come from men just as much as it can come from women is going to change that. But it can't be this wilting lily, and I use this cliche, and it's very symbolic, which is nobody appreciates me or understands me, therefore I am going to go and do my work someplace else. No, this is different. This says I am not going to shut up, and I'm not going to sit down. I am going to share my thoughts, and I'm going to share my power, and I am going to take my rightful place alongside men, and in many cases, even higher positions. Because when you undergo initiation, that is the real positioning. That's the real hierarchy of things. All this political, economic, social stuff is just a superficial, distorted expression of much greater values. Any comments up to this point?
Yeah, we have a couple of comments and we have a hand raised.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Francis. Can you talk?
Yes, just as an example, this new wave of feminine energy is an example in the U.S. House of Congress.
Yes.
It's shattering the crystallization that has been in place for some decades now.
Yes.
So it is a process, but the shattering has begun.
And then
Excellent. Thank you, Francis.
Suzanne Miller, she was talking from earlier, but she said the kiss on the ramp, the seeker, the personality meeting the soul on the Antakarana.
Oh, that is precious. Excellent.
And then Anne Veronica says the myths of Aesopus from ancient Greece have electricity with only one pole. So the feminine and the masculine are both needed. Oh, you cannot have electricity with only one
Yes,
pole. So the feminine and the masculine are both needed.
that is so true. And any of you who have been daring enough to hang into these 12 presentations, or even a fair amount of them, know how much emphasis I have placed on magnetism and electricity as a way to demonstrate polarity and fusion, and how things easily can get out of balance, but they can be brought back into harmony and balance when you have an understanding of your rays, your astrological influences, and all the other things that we study. Excellent comments. Thank you.
And isn't it also, we need to be receptive to the higher levels, but then swap the polarity as we use that to the lower levels. Does that make sense?
Yes, adapt it, step it down, bridge it.
Right, there. That's probably a better, the bridging of it. So we have the capacity to do both. And,
Yes,
and it is receptive to the higher, and then use that in our good works and whatnot for those who will come after us,
yes,
or the lower kingdoms, or
right.
right.
This, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Joe says it's intriguing that on 9/19/1919, 100 years ago this year, the U.S. constitutional amendment allowing women to vote became law. Look
Ooh,
what a balance between masculine and feminine is possible in another
have been
100
in,
years.
absolutely. That's the vision. The ability to look into the past, to learn historically, and then to project into the future. This is where I get my optimism, by studying history and knowing the direction it's going. The weight for the good, the beautiful, and the true is on our side and on the side of the forces of light. This image right here shows the paradox of where the masculine and feminine energies sort of meet. And white magic, a treatise in white magic, goes into this in great detail. Creation of thought forms and how it has to have the warmth of the feminine, which would be like the astral, and then the structure of the mental, which would be more masculine. And then it has to be, once it's created, it has to be driven out of the auric sheaths to go on its way to do its magic. And a lot of these theories and principles and laws may seem incredibly abstract, but as time goes by, we realize they have a very definite practical correspondence. And the test for men and women are really the same when you look at the big picture. They have to balance between emotions and thought, between love and abstract thinking, and love and its higher forces and its higher expressions, and the will. And they can be compatibly balanced, but almost all students come into incarnation with certain inherent imbalances. And the test is to be open and receptive to the changes that we all need to make. And I love the phrase when the Tibetan talks about an initiation, and this is a first ray statement. He says, as disciples, we need to learn the technique or techniques that will force ourselves into the periphery of those lives which are more advanced than us and of which we know nothing. I want the group just to think about that for a minute. This is where intention and will comes in. It used to be intelligence was enough to be an initiate quite far back in earlier cycles. Then it became you had to add to that compassion and love. But this cycle, the Aryan cycle, it's demanded that you add to those two other fine qualities the will of the Father, the supreme conditioning identification with pure being, as Michael Robbins would eloquently share and speaks so often about. Okay, excellent.
Bree says concerning the female political newbies, they bring in much courage. They will make mistakes and will be challenged to remain fearless in those mistakes. And then she adds, blessed are those who are willing to be persecuted.
Oh, that's great. And it's so true. And people who are heroes or people who have courage are not people who don't have fear or intimidation. They go forward in spite of it. And that is something that is so important for every disciple to learn. Because as you move in from your own personal will to the soul's will, and then ultimately the will of the monad or your Father in heaven, all these fears and intimidations, they disappear because you're filled with invincible power, an invincible shield that insulates you from the lower personality, although you still have a personality and you use it for service and grounding. Okay. How is this? Now we're moving into the idea of the dual vortex, the sphere, the vacuum, and how it can be seen in the masculine and feminine. And there's a sort of a mantra that comes from the age of Pisces, and it's a very good mantra, and it's been used effectively for thousands of years. And it goes, if I can remember it correctly, no man goes to the Father but by way of the Son. And the Father being the Father in heaven, and the Son being the Christ, the love principle. But I think there's going to be something added to that mantra as we move into this age of Aquarius. And it will go more like this. No man goes to the Father but by way of the Son and the Divine Mother. And those who are in preparation for the third initiation are becoming aware of the importance of the right use of power as a personality and what the soul is attempting to communicate. And this will have some powerful effects where the intermediaries will dissipate and there'll be eventually continuity of consciousness from the highest to the lowest levels. And this little passage from DK, are there any volunteers who would like to read this? Because we're going to make some comparisons. How is a vortex, which is made up of a material side and a spiritual side, how is it formed? And this is about how it's formed through sound in a very poetic way through the old commentary. Are there any volunteers to read this?
I don't see any, but I'll read it.
Thank you.
The old commentary phrases as follows. Those who are demanding to be saved have cried aloud. Their voices penetrate into the formless world and there evoke response. Those who, in distant eons, have pledged themselves to save and serve, respond. Their cry too rings forth, and ringing penetrates into the dark and distant places within the worlds of form. And thus a vortex is established and kept alive by that constant dual sound. And then a touch is made, and for a space, enduring time, the two are one, the saving souls and the units to be served. Slowly, the vision of the saving one becomes a light which guides the crying ones into the place of light.
What we have here is a summary of one of the most esoteric parts of the path of initiation. What DK is saying about sound, the ones who need and are demanding and they're crying, this is humanity and this is sort of the personality. So you can take this on a large sort of level of humanity, or you can take it as an individual, because the analogy is the same. When the demand is sufficient and you can create, and we know in building the Antakarana Bridge, there's 6 stages with particular emphasis on the first 3 here, because that's what sets the whole thing in motion. You have intention, visualization, and then projection. In intention, you're sort of formulating what it is you want to do. Then you visualize it, you energize it with the feminine. The masculine is energized by the feminine. You're creating a thought form here, but the projection part is the part that is the most difficult for many disciples to learn, because this is where you invoke the will. You're using the third aspect of divinity, the third ray, in the first part. Then you're using the second aspect of divinity in the second part, which is the visualization. And then you use the power of the will. You drive it up the Antakarana Bridge into the world of the soul, the hierarchy, or the master's ashram. So this whole magical process can be outlined through sound, color, vibration, number, and geometry, sacred geometry. And I hope to touch on all of those different categories because they all relate to each other. So now we're moving into the idea of the vortex and how this is like sort of a visualization of that process. The little figure at the bottom, he, through the Ajna Center, and I'm oversimplifying for convenience here because most of you are already aware of this and doesn't really need to be repeated, but I want to show it symbolically with an image. He is created his little end of, he has created his vortex in time and space through the 3 opening building bridges with the Antakarana. And he's driving that through sound or vibration or color. Notice it does have a color, sort of reddish. It does have a certain form. And he's driving that up into the higher levels. And when it reaches the big cone, this is where the 3 higher aspects of building the Antakarana Bridge come in, which is, if I can remember correctly, invocation, evocation, and then resurrection and transfiguration. That might not be exactly in the correct order. In any event, he sends out his cry. I want beauty. I want peace. I want love. I want to be a more effective server. I want to create thought forms and ideas that are in tune with the Aquarian age and in the Master's ashram and the soul's intent. He sends that out, and when it is done with a pure heart, when it's done in the right magical way, it will get a response. And this is the fourth part of building the underground bridge. Invocation, he sends it out. Evocation, the return. And if you look at that carefully, you'll notice that that image sort of looks like a sword. And that image, this is one of mine that I put together. I actually went into Facebook and I found somebody had done research on sound waves, and they had actually been able to draw up a graph of sound waves of a percussion instrument. I think it was a trumpet. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? Trumpet is a first-ray instrument, and when you're using the first-ray alignments, you're actually creating in miniature something sword-like. Now, again, it's vibration, it's electrical, it's magnetic, it's sound, but it's inner sound, although there's an outer correspondence. And I thought, wow, that shows you the beginning stages of building the dual vortex. He creates his end, and you can see, if you look carefully, it's a little subtle, these spirals, his spiral goes up, and then when it reaches the upper cone, and the shaft comes down, the sort of the return call comes down, there's a second spiral. So there's always this dual spiral motion taking place in every invocation and within every sphere. And every sphere always has an inlet and an outlet. And that's how they communicate amongst themselves, because they're every body, every sheath, every principle, they all intertwine, they nest, to use a phrase in physics that's so perfect when you study atomic and subatomic particles. They nest one within the other. Okay. One of the fundamental concepts which is grasped by all magical workers is that both will and desire are force emanations. They differ in quality and vibration, but are essentially currents of energy, one forming an initial vortex or center of activity, being centrifugal, and the other being centripetal, and the main factor in the accretion of matter into a form around the central vortex. Now, this sort of describes the vortex in a slightly different way. And then the rest of the quote goes on to say that this is also true with gods and men. It's sort of through the law of correspondence. So what we're going to do in the next image is, for any of you who have followed my Facebook posts, I have in many different ways posted this upper and lower triad. This is how the Tibetan describes it, and I have simply just rendered it visually. You have an upper monadic triangle made up of Atma, Buddhi, Manas, and you have a lower personality triangle made up of astral, lower mind, and the physical-etheric. And the soul, which is sort of faded out here, is in between until those two principles are brought together. And it is also a triad made up of will, love, and intelligence that mediates sort of between the two until the third initiation and after. But you're really looking at a sphere that has an inlet and an outlet. And this is where the lower mind is tortured, because it's so difficult to describe a process that's organic and cellular through words and even images. And that's why we've brought together today some really, really powerful images that we're going to share. And now this is the same image as the one you just saw before. It's called the star tetrahedron. It's two triangles that fuse together. And if you've ever studied HPB, she goes over this extensively about how the lower principles need to be elevated to their rightful place and fused with the higher principles. And then the higher must in turn descend down to the lower. It's sort of reciprocal. And there you have in the middle, I don't know if you can see it, it's not a really great resolution image, I apologize, but it's there, a little figure of a man or a woman. And their position is in the middle of this dual star tetrahedron. But again, the star tetrahedron is only one expression of the upper and lower triad. And what we're going to do now is show you a video that not only shows this in rapid revolution, these two triangles in perfect sync, but you're going to see billowing out on the right and left-hand side these sort of conical shells. And these, if you could imagine, you're really looking at the center of a sphere, and that these undulating loops that you see in the next video are actually the walls of the sphere, and that they are also a symbol of the upper and lower triad. And this is where you make the crossover between the lower fifth ray description and outline and something that more closely approximates the experience. These videos can never be the experience, but they can be invocative to the intuition and the higher mind. So with that introduction, take a deep breath, relax, and
Duane,
yes.
when you play the video, can you make it full screen? You just right click on it and click
Okay.
view in full screen, and escape should bring it out of it.
Breathe into it. One of the least understood facets of the ageless wisdom teachings is motion. We are constantly taught that energy and force are in constant motion. It's perhaps a treatise in cosmic fire that devotes the most explanation to what DK calls the three types of motion. Rotary, which is where some life spins sort of like in a circle. It just goes round and round and round. And it has a certain freedom, but at the same time, it's confined within that rotary motion. As it becomes energized by higher and higher forces, that rotary motion becomes galvanized into greater activity, and the rotation speeds up. When the rotation reaches a certain velocity, it goes radiatory. And when that life goes radiatory, it begins now to take on a new type of identity. And one of those identities is it now participates in what DK calls the second type of motion, or cyclic spiral. That the entity in question, the life, it can be a tiny atom, a human causal body, it can be the whole solar system with all of the heavenly men as a composite. It creates a bridge from one type of motion, rotary, to another, and that is where the second aspect of deity comes in. We're going from the third aspect, which is rotary, round and round and round, to the second, which is cyclic spiral. And this is where the crossover between the lower mind and the abstract mind takes place. And when that is sufficiently developed and cyclic spiral motion is understood intuitively, then you move into what DK calls progressive motion, which is the will of the Father. Although it's not motion as we understand the term, progressive motion. It's more like complete silence and inactivity. But the Tibetan describes it as progressive motion. And I guess you could say it's the spanning of a distance between 2 points in the fastest and most exponential way with the least expenditure of energy. Although I'm sure that's a very superficial analysis compared to what DK outlines in Cosmic Fire. So this idea of motion is very powerful. And if anybody has had an experience or an insight or wants to share something, please do it now about the animation. Go ahead, Francis.
Yes, that animation is very powerful. The lower and higher triad find their rotary balance, so to say, and form a 6-star, which grants all protection in that 6-star.
Yes.
Transmute to 5-star, 5-point star, the Adamic man, perfect template.
Yes, the Adamic man. And with your background, Francis, in study of the Sri Yantra, this to me could be considered sort of an early prototype of what becomes more complex and more multidimensional. Excellent.
Yes, this as a base, yes.
Excellent, thank you. Any additional comments?
Yes, let me get to them. Chris says, finally understand the beating motion of the heart. You would see the pushing, pulsing caused by the vortex with the motion.
That's beautiful. You know, the old commentary and the stanzas of DN are more like poetry, but not poetry as people normally associate it with it. It creates word pictures, just like the Agni Yoga books. They create word pictures, and you can step out of the lower mind and you can get right into a more abstract place. That was beautifully described. Thank you.
And Joe says the first thing that captured me in the motion was how big the circle is projected.
Yes, and it's breathing. Every entity palpitates and breathes to a certain rhythm, and we are all simply cells within the planetary logos, and all the heavenly men are centers within the solar logos, and they're all beating to a common heart. At the very center of every atom is a beating heart. Excellent.
Catherine says, I've been waiting for this a long time. Thank you.
That's beautiful.
And then Francis has his hand up again.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, further, a perfect expression of analogy of the Shiva Shakti energies coming into balance.
Yes. Yes.
The descending Shakti energies into form, and the raising Shiva energies into spirit. Finding
Absolutely. Excellent. Okay, on the next image, which is very similar to the one we just saw, only on a much more expanded level. If I were asked what would be the difference, the first image would help people that maybe are working on the heart, and even though the will is embryonic, it's emerging. This one is a little different. It's that plus something else. If you look at the image, you have the figure is a little more dominant. It's sort of like a Buddha, and it's androgynous. It's male and female, and you see this electric current coming from the top of the apex of the upper triangle, and you see, just like Francis described, you're very intuitive, Francis. I've noticed that you're always one step ahead of my images, which is great. We want to develop telepathy. We all want to be in sync. So thank you. And then down below, you have the Shakti, the Earth Mother. And this is what I meant when I said, no man will go to the Father, but by way of the Son and the Divine Mother. Because the Mother is really the central heart of the star tetrahedron. And the upper part is the will, and the lower part is the Divine Mother. But not as people normally associated with the Divine Mother. It's not just love and compassion and sensitivity, which are very important. It is raw power from the third aspect of divinity, which lifts the disciple at the third initiation and after right up to that top electrical discharge, which is Shambhala, that comes from the upper ashrams. So you see the upper and lower electrical discharges creating the vertical arm of the cross, and then you're going to see in motion the horizontal arm of the cross that passes through his heart center. And the music that's put to this was actually done by the artist that made these, and he has studied sacred music for most of his adult life, and he claims this is one of the frequencies that you're going to hear that helps invoke that very dynamic first-ray type energy. So go ahead.
Duane,
anybody wants to make a comment?
Yeah, I just want to tell you there are a couple of comments here.
Yes.
And Veronica says, for me, in my mind, the lesser triangles of each triangle rotate also. So 3 times 3 equals 9, and 2 times 9 equals 18. The lower 18 subplanes of the human endeavor.
Excellent. That was Veronica?
Yes, and Veronica. And Antoinette says vertical and horizontal alignment coming together at the heart.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And Francis has his hand up again. So
Okay, Francis, you're on.
Quick higher analogy, as you said, no one goes to the Father except through the Son, S-O-N.
Yes.
Higher analogy, nobody goes except through the Sun, S-U-N, which is a composite of all the color, form, and sound that you've been relating here.
Yes. The stepping stones. All is symbol, and the symbols have to be revealed. But there are different levels that symbols are made on, and when you penetrate one level, you find there's another level. It's sort of like a Chinese torture box, where you, or more like an onion, let's say, you peel off one, and there's another. But they're not just simple visual images. They're more multidimensional, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh dimensional, and then you get into just pure light, pure sound. Okay, excellent. If there's not any additional comments, we will explore this next one and just breathe into it, relax, and the colors. This is a very third ray, very sort of first ray. It has gold and some bright white, although red is usually associated, and it's got some blue in it. So it's sort of a lot of the rays. Okay, excellent. This is sort of a fifth ray presentation moving into the fourth ray that I pulled together on all the triangles between the first and fifth initiation, the major triangles that Tibetan gives in cosmic fire. And if you look at this carefully, you'll see there are many, many triangles, but there are lower triangles and there are higher triangles. And it's sort of hard to really split them apart because of the intricacy and the interconnectedness of all of them. But what you just saw is exactly what you're seeing here, the electricity coming from the solar angel and then the one monadic life of the synthesizing crown center, and then the earth mother, base of the spine, coming from below up. Note that the base of the spine is ruled by ray 1, 4, and 7. Ray 7 by average humanity, ray 4 by advanced disciples, and ray 1 by initiates. So what that demonstrates, and that's why there's 3 different colors, that every center you see here has a number of different levels that are not represented. It's sort of impossible to really do that until I get more sophisticated, and others that I know get more sophisticated in their skills as audio visual artists. And this is why seventh ray expressed by average humanity with this lower triangle of the sacral center and the solar plexus is where all the problems lie. This is the prisoners of the planet, and where humanity has so much difficulty at this time coming up for the first initiation, but not having passed through it. That's the violet, seventh ray. Okay, the fourth ray is the second ring. Can you see it in there? It's sort of hard to see if you're on your cell phone, but this is where, when the higher centers are open, the solar plexus to the heart, the throat, solar plexus, heart, throat, and the solar plexus, heart, ajna, and I'm not going to go through all of those triangles because there's actually quite a few, and there's mental triangles. This is where the fourth ray, and this is what HPB says, that when your life is pure and when you are dedicated to service and you're becoming aware of the soul in your life, the heart sends an impulse to the base of the spine, and it's love with its intention to raise matter that causes the Kundalini to rise in its early stages at the third initiation. And then later, when you become an initiate, third initiate, and after, the first ray takes over, and that's what that point is, the black dot in the little red circle. So we're looking at a multi-dimensional chart that, just for simplicity, we've charted the way it is. And now what we're going to do, we're going to take a quote by the Tibetan, and it's going to preface the last image, the last animation that we're going to see. And we actually might be right on time for a change. BL, I'm sure you're proud of me.
Very.
And it's a, BL, would you like to read this?
Sure. I just want to say that Joe says, I can't read the label on the double rings just above the base chakra. Can you help?
Okay, let's just, I can. Let's just go to previous. Okay, what was the question again?
She said she can't read the, hold on a minute here. Can't read the label on the double rings just above the base chakra.
Okay, that are in purple?
She doesn't specify.
Okay. Between the base of the spine and the one monadic life are positioned certain lesser centers that actually contribute to the third initiation. And they're called etheric centers. and I can only generalize for convenience, but I'm going to explain to you what those are. Those are the sexual organs. And when the Kundalini comes up, it can overstimulate the human sexual organs and cause what DK called a rioting of the lower elemental forces. And this happens prior to the first initiation. At the first initiation, the disciple, not celibate, gets control over their sexual desire nature. And then at the second initiation, they get even more control. And also they get control of their astral body or emotional bodies. And then at the third initiation, they get control over their lower minds. But you'll note that the sexual organs, if you can see my little mouse, and I'm assuming she's talking about that.
Yes, yes, she did clarify that.
The sexual organs relate to a center between the shoulder blades, to a minor center above the solar plexus, but below the heart, which is called the diaphragm center, and the spleen. And these four lesser centers feed, and I'm quoting the Tibetan now, the Kundalini fire. Now, this is why, as you progress down the path, you don't have to be celibate, but you will naturally be transmutating these lower centers into their higher correspondence. And this is why sexuality has to be made sacred, because if you dissipate this etheric buildup of energy between these lesser centers, and it's not just the sexual part or the sexual organs, it's these others through exercise, through a good nutrition, and all the other things that are almost automatic to people who are sort of well along on the path. So there is a relationship between the base of the spine, the sexual organs, and the higher centers. The spleen, diaphragm, shoulder blades, and sexual organs, they create this etheric energy that builds up like a dam, and then it becomes released like a floodgate. And at some point, we'll talk about this more extensively, because I can only go into sort of the physical part of this, but there's a lot other things happening. I hope that answers your question. Okay, any other questions before we come to our concluding?
No, that's all. That's all I see.
Okay.
All right. The star will shine forth. Future astrology and a new branch of psychology. Astrologers will eventually find it necessary to cast 3 horoscopes. 1, physical, 2, emotional, and 3, mental. It will be found that these 3 charts will take certain geometrical lines. The lines of energy will form patterns. These 3 charts, superimposed one upon the other, will give the personality diagram, the individual life pattern. Amazing symbolic charts and lineal forms will be found to emerge when this is done, and the geometry of the individual will grow out of this, for it will be found that each line will function in relation to another line, and the trends of the life energies will become apparent. Eventually, even in this department of knowledge, the star will shine forth. This will constitute a new branch of psychology, and its true exponent for our age will duly be found. I but indicate the lines of the future astrology in order to safeguard the present.
This is one of the most powerful quotes by the Tibetan. And he more or less indicates that he can't reveal too much about this because it might detract or undermine the bridging work that he was trying to do at the time historically when his work with Alice was undertaken. And you have to remember that it's by DK's own admission that a lot of these teachings that he gave had the objective of taking a group of people that were largely emotionally polarized and were developing their mental bodies, and he needed to train them to really increase that mental clarity, that mental polarization, to get off the astral plane, at least in its lower aspects, because the astral body, the emotions are so important, and we will talk about that just by itself. It is so significant. But the idea of a new astrology where you take 3 charts and link them through triangles, through lines. And to go back to, was it Veronica who made the comment about the triangles? Who made the comment about the triangles?
Yes.
Yeah, and this one is for you, my dear, because if this doesn't put a smile on your face, nothing will, because the next image shows a series of triangles all connected together into sort of a morphing, organic, fractal, holographic, tetrahedron, divine geometry form that's pulsating and flashing and gyrating. And it's the extension of everything that we've shared here. In other words, now we're coming to the end, and we have to keep in mind, to quote HPB and DK, that every one of our lives demonstrates on the inner planes to the master's view some type of geometric form. Yes, our bodies, our rays have a certain quality of light. They have a certain note or sound, which we've really reviewed quite extensively. Now we're sort of getting into more of the geometric part of this approach to our own essential divinity. And this next image takes everything I said and puts it into its proper perspective on an intuitive and abstract level. Are there any comments or questions before we end? And we'll allow for a few minutes feedback after this last image. Oh, I'm over 2 minutes. I take it back,
No,
Dale.
no, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
That's what happens when you have an interactive webinar.
Yes.
I just wanted to tell you that Joe said, yes, thank you. Very informative, your answer to her question. So,
Excellent.
and that's all I see right now. So.
Triangles, the very basis of all existence on every level. And the triangle is the dynamic that links all these different principles together. If you take a triangle with 3 points, and keep in mind that those 3 points are seated on different levels, this explains how energy from a higher level gets down to a lower level if you're looking from above down. If you're looking from below up, it explains how all invocation takes place from a lower level to a higher level. And when the 3 points of the triangle are connected, you are connecting 3 different levels. This is where freedom comes. This is where initiation takes place. And one last thing, when the 3 points of the triangle are rotating in rapid revolution, to quote the Tibetan, it goes radiatory. And what you're going to see right here are a series of triangles all going radiatory simultaneously. So take a deep breath, relax. Any comments? Anything anybody would like to share?
I don't see any. Yes, Francis has his hand up.
Very quickly, 3 points of the rotating triangle, as in that light, love, and power restore the planet on Earth.
Yes, excellent. Thank you, Francis.
Risa says like a diamond. And Veronica says it was beautiful. Thank you. A sphere of light.
This can be the monad. Go ahead, Rose.
Oh, and to say that it seems like the sounds really did seem like it was like something internal that was like bouncing off of each shape was like creating this sound that it just seems to fit so perfectly. It's like the shape was creating the sound.
Excellent.
Lisa said, loved how the tinkling bells seemed to give a voice to the form as if it were speaking.
Yes, that's beautiful, Lisa. Thank you. We as monads, as souls, as integrated personalities, we glow, we palpitate, we throb to the great heartbeat of the inner sun, the great heart of the sun, the love. And that's our destiny. It's our heritage. It's who we are. These are not just vague artistic renderings. They're actually signatures of each and every person here in some way. And if some of the images are a little disorientating, that might be good, because it might indicate a shift from the lower mind into the higher mind, and there is always a little sense of what I call, for lack of better word, psychic vertigo. You know, like you're walking down the street and you've walked on that street 1,000 times and you know every footstep, but you're not paying attention, and all of a sudden one of your feet go over the curb and you were not expecting it. And there's this tiny sense of vertigo. You're floating in space. Any additional comments?
Yes, Josephine says, divine sound, divine light, divine motion. Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. All of this can be no more than that which looks into it. It is a mirror of who we are and what we are becoming and what we have become. And I like to make these images available through Makara, because participants can go in and take them out and they can put them on a loop. They can take one of these animations and put it on a continuous loop and have a 20-minute meditation, in which you're only getting a 2-minute meditation here. This is just to inspire people to want to explore.
And we have a couple of similar comments here, so I'm just going to read them both together.
Please.
And Antoinette says, can sound become radiatory? And then Diana said, could this triangle and rotary movement irradiating pulses of colored rays be transformed in radiative spheres?
Yes, both, to answer both of those. Sound, the purpose of this exploratory work is to create an interest in what DK calls tuning the inner or etheric ear. When a disciple can hear the rumblings or the murmur of the different bodies, starting with the etheric, astral, and mental, they are building a bridge of sound, and each tendril electrical magnetic sound tendril leads to a greater realization and a better understanding of, you might say, the trunk of the tree of life. And sound does go radiatory. It becomes a blinding light in the recognition of the soul, the hierarchy, the masters. Okay, Rose.
Could you elaborate on what you shared with me earlier about those sounds that you said the author said that they were somehow the exact sounds of the geometric patterns?
Yes, the artist has done some of these animations, and they go under the name of Exon. You can see it there in this video. And you can follow this and see other images by him. He has a whole series of them. He's a very advanced sort of esotericist that doesn't quite have the language that we may be familiar with, but he's very advanced, and he has put certain sounds that go with the animations. And I think he's right on. I feel this image is very, very heart-centered, and others may get other energies out of it because the heart contains everything. But so when you combine color, sound, and geometry, all three different senses are being impacted. And when you study the evolution of the senses, as DK has outlined in Cosmic Fire, another area of important research, we realize that we need to have our senses alerted all the time to new influences, new impacts of energy that maybe come from the Deva evolution that may creep into our lives very surreptitiously or innocuously, that are very powerful and worth researching, worth studying, making into a meditation. Okay, well, good. If there aren't any more comments, we will.
Suzanne just said, thank you for a truly inspiring spiraling experience. And she says, thanks to me too.
Excellent. Well, I'm inspired by all of you. Your questions, your insights, your answers. We're all one, and we're all glorified in the creative difference and yet oneness of the whole program. Excellent.
And Duane will send me the videos, and I will post them probably in a day or two to Makara, and then I'll send the announcement out letting you know. Several of you, I think this is your first time with us at one of Duane's webinars, so you probably don't have the link. Others of you might have the link where we put them, but it usually takes us a day or two to get everything together and for me to get it posted. So it will be coming shortly.
Excellent. Thank you, and we send our love. And come visit us on Facebook if you haven't been there. It's a little crazy, but it's very beautiful, and there are many, many important contributors, and I feel privileged to be able to work with them.
And I have that link that will be in the announcement, the link to the Facebook page too. So
Thank you.
good night, everybody, and thanks, Duane.
Thank you.